Hey there, Marshall. How's it going today?
I'm pretty good. I got back from the gym. I did a leg lift and also some mobility and rehab for my foot. So I'm doing great.
Awesome. I love that you're getting after it with the foot. I know that's not always
Yeah.
easy
A
to
lot of
motivate
ankle
yourself.
cars right now.
Yeah, I that's what I like to hear. Not about the injury, but the ankle cars go a long way for sure.
Oh yeah.
Um, Sweet. Well, I kind of wanted to ask what if there was anything in particular or a string of things that got you into the mental performance world or
Yeah.
career.
I would say I first got interested on a team level. So I was studying psychology in my undergrad, and I was initially interested in IO psychology, which is industrial organizational psychology. It's basically just how psychology applies to business. I thought it was really interesting. There's a lot of stuff on like I guess the industrial side of making people more productive, and also the organizational side of like how do we understand and create healthier group dynamics that like then also facilitate people to be more productive. So I got pretty into that. I did an internship. I interned at some company in DC in like their HR department for the summer, and I thought it was really boring. And at the same time, I was an assistant coach on AMP that year, so like 2022, and so being on a team that was that organized really highlighted to me how like all the stuff I was studying like had pretty much the same application in a sport team and environment, and so I got pretty hooked on that immediately. And then after nationals, where we didn't finish where we wanted to, and then going into the college season, I started to think a lot about what makes individuals perform better or worse from that side, and not just like how do you as a team like be better, and then it
Awesome.
just went from there.
Yeah, that's really cool. And you just recently started your own practice or company, correct? Spiral Mental
Yes, yeah,
Performance.
spiral mental performance. I finished up my graduate training hours um, pretty early into the spring, and so for on the mental performance side for my CMPC, which is to be a certified mental performance consultant. So I finished up those hours, and I'm pretty much just waiting for the degree in name to graduate. But I'm finishing my degree in clinical mental health counseling. So tangent but unrelated, and I'm doing my clinical like training and internships in that right now. And so I figured it'd be a good time to just like continue to do sports stuff on the side because I enjoy that more.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I think you've in a relatively short time been a great resource. I think for a lot of players and teams. Um, yeah, I know. So this year you were coaching slow, correct, in Boston?
Yes, it's been super fun.
Awesome. Yeah, you've had. Is it one tournament, two? What have you been to so far?
We went to Mixed Easterns as a preseason tournament back
Hmm.
in like the last few days of May, and then we went to PEC West, and then we're going to US Open 2 weekends.
Awesome. Nice. Colorado is just out there for Masters.
Yeah, I
So
know we had like probably a third of the team go to Masters National, so they're already there. So they'll know what the altitude is like.
were any of them playing with Hey Babe? Or
I
no?
think they were all playing with slower.
Okay, that makes sense. I know a couple
Hmm.
people who were in Boston area that were playing with a different team. So
Hmm.
nice. With that being said, I was fortunate enough to be on a team from Philly who had a big upset win
Yes,
against the
join or
defending
die.
champs.
I,
Join
I
or
was
die.
following that. I was following that. I was super excited to see that happen.
That was the moment we won that game was one of the most elated I've been in many years that I can remember. And it brought up a point. Someone asked what if there was anything in particular about that game, about the team that we did, that was said, that helped us really show up in that game and play to our potential and not shy away from the big moment. And for me, I mean, I don't think there was anything super conscious. It was really like we were having fun and we were pretty loose. I think it helped that Voltron was also pretty loose because like I don't think they took us seriously.
Yeah,
So we
I
weren't
mean,
thinking.
Voltron's been. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
But
go
yeah,
ahead.
Voltron's like gone very deep at that tournament almost every time. So versus Join or Die hasn't had the same success. So it's
Yeah.
pretty
So
easy
we
to
were.
see that dynamic play out in a game where one team is playing loose, but it's because they aren't taking it seriously, and the other team's playing loose because they don't perceive any like there's no pressure on their end, and that can lead to them performing better.
Exactly. Exactly. I didn't identify much other than that, except that we really didn't take anything for granted. But it brought up something that I wanted to ask you, which is, are there ways that you have seen, that you know of, that have worked to help teams or players show up in big moments, show up in big games, and play to their potential rather than kind of crumbling under the pressure?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot about it on a team perspective because I'm coaching on a team, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think when we look at it, there's kind of a couple key foundations that inform like how I approach it, and one is that uh, a group on its own is almost its own entity, composed of like all the individuals in it. So you can almost treat it as it's like its own living organism or like its own brain. And then two is that the same elements of resilience in individuals also happen in groups. And so you think about emotional regulation, especially um, yeah, emotional regulation, like coping skills, frameworks, and language, and how we think and perceive things. Those all affect a group in the same way that it affects individual. It's just a lot more complex. So I think a lot of it is um, having a common framework for the team to process pressure and stress and frustration. Um, because an individual might do it one way, but when you have a whole team, when there's a common language and a common mental model, when people buy in, it becomes much more powerful.
That that makes a lot of sense. If
Mm-hmm.
you have a lot of different things going on that aren't necessarily congruent, that can I can imagine be problematic. Like the typical, someone is toxically positive, versus someone else who is just like negative in a way that drags down their teammates.
Yeah. And so it can be really helpful for as a team to like explore and settle on like on your own narrative alongside the actual like skills we use. Like you can teach emotional regulation as a skill. Like how you be aware of your emotions, how you identify and label them, how you go about like actually changing what you're feeling, or directing that in the future. Like that on its own is a pretty important skill. But equally as important in a team framework is to have a common narrative, because that narrative sets the foundation for like the language and how you message and process stuff, in huddles, on the lines, after something happens. Um, and when there's no unity there, what you can see is after things happen, teammates retreat into their, instead of buying in as a team or processing it together, it can be really easy to then just retreat and then process it with the people who are more like-minded with you on the team. So maybe it's like your buddy group or someone you're friends with on the team, and like that on its own can be good. But if there's no buy-in or trust in the team, um, partially because of like a lack of a shared model, um, then what you can get is that distrust breeds or resentment breeds, and someone saying like, oh, we were playing so terrible, I can't believe you did that, or like, like I can't believe I wasn't called on universe, or like why did this person keep getting played or keep getting calls for them, and like those little small things kind of just like amplify.
That makes total sense. And as you're talking, I'm noticing things like from our team over the weekend where our end result, we would have liked it to be a little better, but we showed up and played well in big games. And I think one big thing is like there was team buy-in with the decisions. There wasn't questioning the leadership. Like we had some players towards the bottom of the roster that, especially in close games against good teams, did not get much playing time, if any. And they were actively encouraging the players on the field to stay on. It's like, no, if you're good, I don't want to come on. Like you're doing great. And I think that is massive. And I think it's something that often doesn't happen with highly competitive players who are used to playing, is that buying in enough to fully trust the decision making of leadership. And I think that really helped us.
Yeah, I think I think that buy-in is really important in that selflessness part. I think one thing that you really spoke about is it's almost the clarity of that, of like not just trusting the leadership to make those decisions, but knowing that there's real clarity behind those decisions and understanding them. This is another thing of like, this is less even of a sports like thing, more just like a thing about basic human behavior, but uncertainty breeds anxiety for all of us in every aspect of our lives. We're usually trying to get a little more control, a little more routine, a little more certainty, because frankly, being completely like out in the unknown without any structure or guidance is really scary for most people. And so the same thing applies in groups. If there's no clarity, then that just breeds anxiety in groups, because we're a collection. Like groups are, I would always say that groups are a little more than the sum of people. Right? It's not just like every individual, and you just add them up and it's a plain equation. It often amplifies different parts of us and different people in the group. And so as a result, groups tend to be a giant false multiplier of anxiety. And so if there's no clarity, you can bet that there's going to not be any trust. And then when things really get going, when there's a lot of pressure and stress, then the structure can collapse.
Yeah, I love the way you put that with the multiplier of anxiety, because I've been on teams. I think a lot of people have been on teams where they don't respond particularly well to adversity or high pressure situations, particularly when something doesn't go their way. And people are grumbling on the sideline, and it starts to escalate, and then there's resentment, and people just get in their own heads. So that makes total sense. And the fact that we know a team can be greater than the sum of its parts. It's how there are upsets. It's how you can look at a team on paper and go, this team really shouldn't have won that game. But it's not just the individuals. It's the interaction of all the components.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of it comes down to like there's that false, like the group is the false multiplier of anxiety. And I think it's really, I guess if we go a little back, so instead of looking at how like, you're structuring the group right now for performance, if you're looking at how you're forming the group in general, if you actually pay attention to a new group of people, like when you throw a group of people together in a scenario, it's like, you guys are a new group now. Like if there's no pre-existing thing, you can pretty clearly observe everyone fall into predictable patterns to essentially cope with that anxiety. Because when you're in an undefined group, not knowing what your role is like a terrifying prospect, because you don't know how to behave. You don't know how others are going to behave. You don't know how others are going to react. And so there should be a lot of intention when you're forming a group to be more resilient in general, to make sure that you are setting proper expectations, right? Providing clarity up front, so that way people aren't unconsciously falling into, maybe some less healthy roles, or roles that just don't set them up for success.
Yeah, I love that. That makes total sense. And I think if anyone's listening that is a team leader, a coach, whatever, you can learn a lot from some of the top teams organizationally that are very intentional and communicate well with their expectations. Because that not knowing your expectations or your full role in the team, or how long your leash is, or what they really expect of you on the field, what role you're supposed to be playing, that can make for a really poor experience, and usually worse performance.
Yeah, I always point to the example of like, if you have a difficult teammate or player on your team, if you just threw them into the team and gave them no instruction, they would probably just continue to be themselves and like cause problems on the team. But if you actually like took them aside and laid out like, this is what's expected of you, this is what you can do, if you do this, this is going to happen, right? Setting proper boundaries, setting proper expectations and norms, that's going to go a long way towards creating a better group foundation. But
yeah, the one thing that's interesting is like, certain attitudes when left unchecked can kind of infect the team a little bit. But sometimes it happens in a positive way. So I was on a patrol in 2016, and this shocked me because there were a number of hotheads on the team and guys that you would not describe as positive. And one of my teammates really like attached to my smiles take you miles kind of mantra. And we ended up with an STYM cheer, which honestly shocked me because like I'm pretty smiley. I try to be positive, not in like a toxic way, but just genuinely. And people would cheer it. And even if it was like a little bit reluctant, it would kind of bring the energy up. But that was an interesting example to me of like this positive infection of the team that just came from like enough people noticing it and thinking, you know what, this is something we want to amplify.
Yeah, and it's less of even that noticing part. I this is a lot. This is leaning from the organizational psychology side of things, especially with group culture. But essentially, when we are looking to change behavior in a group, it can't just be a request of like, "Hey, please do this," because people don't want to change, and asking them to implement change, especially on a group level, is really hard because people, if enough people just decide to be a bystander and not do it, then you can't punish everyone on the team, right? So you could, but it's hard, and you might lose a lot of credibility. But
Yeah.
uh, what really is the key to creating positive change is to one, have like the people with credit and authority on your team model that, and then you have to grow buy-in to the point where people who don't want to change see people on the team doing it, and they feel pressure to conform to that, so they feel that it won't be acceptable for them not to do that. So similar thing with a cheer, if it's just like one person doing it and it's like half-heartedly, it's like, okay, like cool, they can do their own thing, that's very special of them. If like half the team is doing it and it's really loud and like you're sitting there on the sideline being like, I don't want to do this, like then you start thinking like, well, I kind of look silly if I'm not doing this. I'm just like sitting on the sideline being quiet or whatever, or not contributing. Then that exerts actual pressure on you to change your behavior.
That makes a ton of sense. And that brings up, I'm curious, with teams or organizations you've worked with, have you been in the position where you identify like, hey, here's a behavior I want to reinforce, I want to change, and then you've gone about trying to make that happen? So if you've done that, I'm curious what that might be, and also like what you did to help that happen. Was it go to team leadership or?
I think a funny example is right now with Slow. We during the early season we weren't really ever on time for stuff, and like we would always set a practice plan, and then at the end of or a tryout plan, and at the end of the trial we'd always cut out an activity because simply like we were too far behind on time. And then like I talked to a couple of people on leadership and like some of the players on the team, and we were like, it'd be great if we could do this. But then some of them were like, I don't think it's possible. And we just like changed a few things, and then we've had, like we'll see if it actually works the rest of the season. But like it's just like really small stuff that like sends a subtle message to people. So one thing we started doing was just like instead of waiting for everyone to be ready to start the huddle, and we would just huddle at like 9 a.m. sharp or 2 p.m. sharp for practices. So then it's like you can get ready in the huddle, but if you come late then and you see everyone huddling, like that's a message to you that you don't just get to like sneak in and put your cleats on and put your sunscreen on like everyone else. Like you're already late to the huddle. Even if it actually makes no like real difference in the time, it like kind of sends people a message on that end of like, this isn't just show up and like you hang around for a couple of minutes and then we start everything. Other things is just like shouting out people. Like I always show up early because I'm one of the travel. I'm grouped with some of our Western Mass people who are traveling to practice every weekend, and so I always make a point to go a little early just in case we hit traffic, and also because I want to be early. And so like I'm always just like when we arrive there, it's just like sending a video or a picture of just like us throwing or hanging out. It's like, we're here early, like we're just hanging out. Come join us. And just also like just shouting out people who put in like take that extra effort to like throw before practice or stay after practice for things. Just like really small stuff, because I know that like as a coach there's a power dynamic with that, and I want to use that to like reinforce positive things, such as like the team being more prompt with things. So it's like small, but then because it's like more intentional, then you get a critical mass of people to do it. And then I remember I made a comment last practice. I was like, oh wow, like we had like attendance of like 18 or something, and like it was 17 people in the huddle at 2 p.m. sharp. I was like, this is awesome. because I
That's
remember
great.
like a month ago we started like 10 minutes late, and it was just like waiting for people to put on the cleats and put sunscreen on, and then they wanted to throw while other people were getting ready, and then we were just like, we should huddle soon, and then we didn't. So
That's such a classic and relatable ultimate thing. Just people being late or kind of moseying their way
yeah,
through, getting ready.
yeah. Because I think if I just told people, hey, show up on time, like they might, but it wouldn't have, felt as organic or um, just appreciated in a sense, because it's just me telling you what to do.
Right. And like it doesn't necessarily help if it's louder. You just say it louder
Yeah.
and angrier. Like that, maybe short term, but I know from a behavioral perspective, it's better to have some of those subtle shifts, lead by
Yeah.
example. And then it's nice when you do get that critical mass. I think of that from like mobility training. It's like you have one person on the team that does their hip cars or ankle or whatever.
Yeah.
They're the odd man out. If you have 4, 5, 6 people and they're in leadership roles, suddenly there's a little bit more buy-in, a little bit more likelihood for people to conform.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, and like that really applies to anything. And like honestly, like at a practice, we'll go overtime sometimes. Like we end up running like 10 minutes overtime on something at least. So like it's still gonna happen, but it's just like the small thing of like I think people forget that like uh, culture in general, but also just like team culture. It's really difficult for it to change dramatically without massive overhauls in like basically leadership or significant like landmark things to happen in like the history of the group. For the most part, it moves very slowly, and so it's just like being okay with that. Like I'm pretty happy with where we are on that end.
That's exciting. Yeah, that is really cool. So another thing I was curious to ask you about, and I know you've dealt with stuff yourself regarding pain, injury. Recently, you've had a surgery, but so like the mental side of pain and injury, how you can stay motivated, stay engaged with your team, with your practice, when you're not able to play either at all or when you're limited. I'm curious, you know, feel free to share your experience, but I'm also curious how you've kind of coached other people through that type of process.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is finding a way to maintain the current level of social support you're getting. Uh, like from personal experience, but also like all the research goes to show that like your social support system is one of the biggest buffers for stress, and like all the other mental health, like symptoms of depression, anxiety, and everything. Having a strong foundation for that is probably the most important thing you can do. For some people, that means stepping away from the sport and like spending more time like with their significant other, with their family. A big thing that a lot of ultimate players that I know tell me is like, yeah, like if I can't do more frisbee because like my partner would get mad that I'm just like spending so much time away from them. So when they get injured, it's like, oh great, like we can do this more. But a lot of it is also just preserving that on the team. A lot of people go through injury and the dynamic with the team changes for the negative often because the team isn't putting in the support to not just like include that person, but make them actually feel valued and like recognized, and just like acknowledge the state that they're in without making them like feel bad or whatever. Yeah. So I think as a team, it's really important to like uh, find ways to include, your teammate. Find ways to like provide support and acknowledgement, like in moments just to like regularly reach out and be like, hey, how are you? Or just like, I know this sucks. I really appreciate you being here. Just like those small comments and like things go such a long way. And I know so many players who, talk to them about the injury and like, it's like, I chose not to return to X or Y team because like it just like changed and I didn't feel like I felt really alone. I think the biggest thing people talk about with the injuries is how isolating it is, because they're there with their team maybe, but they can't participate, and they feel like it's not right for them to like take attention away from the team to themselves, and then the team just ends up like so focused on performance that like they just like go completely like unacknowledged on the wayside. So I think I think really like as a team and as a teammate, you have to devote extra energy towards that. Um, and I think that goes such a long way in towards of like helping you cope with that in terms of like preserving your social support.
Yeah, I really like that. I think, as with other things, it takes a conscious, intentional effort on the part of the team and teammates. Because for anyone who's been injured or chronically injured, you've dealt with this, Marshall. I've dealt with this. It is really hard to show up sometimes when you can't play and you can't play, and you don't want to be a burden. You don't want people to feel bad for you. You don't want people to expend their energy. But at the same time, if there's no attention paid to you at all, and some of the relationships start to feel kind of either transactional or conditional on you playing and contributing to the team, it can be really demotivating. I know for me, when I've had teammates who were injured recently, I could always do better, but I've tried to be more mindful about thanking them for their contribution and asking them how they're doing, because I know, like you said, that it makes a huge difference just to be acknowledged.
Yeah, I think one thing I really appreciate about Slow's culture is how much like emphasis they put on like really making everyone feel like they belong and they're trusted. I think on previous teams I have coached, I've been every time I've coached a team I've like had some sort of injury, but so I think like in the 4 years of coaching, probably like yeah, like coaching 4 teams in 4 years before I coached
Whew.
Slow. I think I got a total of 2 texts from like people just asking like actually how are you with this injury because I know it sucks. Versus with Slow, like especially like when I got the surgery, I got like I've been absolutely bombarded with that at times, and like that's felt really nice. And like as a teammate, I know that would make such a huge difference with like how supported I feel.
Yeah, it is really nice to feel cared for, and again, that empathy can be difficult if you have not experienced that, because people are
Yes.
focused on their performance, how they can do best, either making a team or keeping their playing time, whatever it might be. If you've not been in those shoes, it's hard. But this is why it's great to talk about too, because if people are listening and you have teammates or friends or people who are struggling with injuries, uh, any type of compassion, checking in a way that's not like patronizing or like super pitying, is always really appreciated.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that's super cool. I mean, I wanted to ask that because so many people deal with it, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about the injury itself. So just making sure that there is support, there's
Yeah.
socialization,
I mean,
I know is
like as
big.
human beings, we feel so strongly. Um, we have this need to feel validated and to feel understood, and that need is like foundational towards our well-being. Um, and as an injured person, it can feel really shitty to ask or to feel like you need to like beg for that support at times from your teammates. And so as teammates, I think it's super important to just like know that that need is there and know how to just deliver it without them feeling burdened to ask for it, because that's a form of understanding too. I think
It
it's so
is.
interesting that I go back to Kobe Bryant's like big Facebook post when he tore his Achilles, where he says, and just yeah, like, and I agree with this, where he was like, there's bigger problems in the world than tearing your Achilles. Like there are. There are a lot of things that are going on in the world, and
Yeah.
to think that my foot that I got surgery on, or your sprained ankle, or your sprained hamstring, is like more important than that. Like in the grand scheme of things, it's true, but it's your experience, and it's always so striking to me. You can talk to any athlete at any level, going up to like professional, high school, youth, recreational. Um, the consensus around people's experiences with injury is always the same, in how it is such a huge part of their life that's taken away, and it comes with so many huge feelings. Where yeah, even if it's not not important in the global grand scheme of the earth, like it still matters. It still matters a lot for you, and there's you are right to want support for that.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, and we've talked about perspective in the past in our own conversations, but it's helpful to look at a bigger picture and look at the fact that, okay, this is a relatively small thing, and at the same time, you don't necessarily want other people to do that, because that can feel very invalidating and be like, oh, you know what, like there's so many other things going on. But it can be helpful for us to be like, this is one season, a few months, and there's so much going on in the world and stuff that I can still do. But yeah, in that moment, it can sometimes feel like an attack on our identity. And for Ultimate, I mean, this is a sport that is not, respected to the same degree as some other sports. So being an injured NBA player, it's like there's a little more legitimacy that people see there. Being like, I play Ultimate. It's a massive part of my identity. It's a massive part of my life and has been for a long time. And I'm injured and I can't play. You don't get quite the same sympathy.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. There's definitely a huge difference between especially except for the very few people who manage to make a living doing Ultimate, which I envy them. But also, outside of those people, we're mostly just doing it because we like it. And there's a huge difference between doing a physical activity because you enjoy it versus doing it because it feels like it's part of your job. And so I think recognizing that with the injury component is really real.
Right. It's like, I'm paying money to play this, and that's how important it is, So yeah, the injuries are a challenge. So many people deal with them. And I think something I've noticed that I'm sure you've noticed is there's often kind of a hopelessness in, you get injured and nothing else for a time. It's like nothing else exists. This is my reality right now. And sometimes it's hard to see past that. And I'm curious if you've experienced that with athletes you've coached, and if there's a way you've helped them. Maybe it's just sharing some perspective, but help them to look at hey, this right now is hard, but there is more, Yeah.
I think there's a couple. Yeah, I've worked with a lot of injured athletes, a lot of them coming back from surgery, or they had just gotten injured and are worried about the rehab. I think there's a couple things. One is that recognizing that they're not alone in their experience of what you're feeling probably isn't unique. There are a lot of people who have, one, had the same injuries, maybe had the exact same surgery as you, and two, there's a lot of people who feel the exact same way, whether or not it's a fully torn ACL or just a really bad sprained ankle. There's the feeling is the same for a lot of people, and knowing that you're not alone, that can be really helpful. And then two is also just building in more perspective, as we talked about. More perspective and more understanding to reduce the lack of clarity. So understanding your healing time, your healing time frame. So that way you can understand and cope with what seem like small setbacks in the moment, because I'm sure, as the rehab process often isn't linear. Pain is part of that, right? So dealing with the psychology of pain is really important, knowing how to cope with that versus you feel a little bit of pain, you're just so it's all over again, versus feeling that pain and understanding that's part of the process, that it's normal, and that you're on the right track, and that the track is this long, and when you get back to it, you'll be able to do these cool things, but you're not there yet, right? That's a very different perspective to have on things, especially dealing with the psychology of pain. So I would say understanding their feelings, and then gaining clarity and perspective on their actual process.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think it's so far regarding performance, pain, injury, etc. It seems like a big theme is clear expectations.
Yeah. I think another thing also is gaining more clear expectations on your identity and self, not just in your sport, but also outside of your sport. So I think within your sport, a lot of people come back from injuries and then continue to get frustrated that they aren't the same player that they were while they just got cleared back for sport. And it's this is such a natural part of it. This is just you coming into a off season or into a season out of shape. This is, this is kind of expected. And I think like some really cool data to back that up is like there's a lot of research, or not just research, but statistics on like professional sport players when like in the season they come back from an injury versus like the season before they got injured, and there's measurably a big drop in that first year back. So like that thing's pretty normal and expected. So there's a lot of like for players needing to readjust their expectations for themselves as a player and like what they want out of their career. Um, so with a young player, it's gonna be like understanding that like you still have a lot ahead of you, and like you have an opportunity to build something. And versus like older players, it might be recognizing like that, recognizing the realities of your career and where you are with your injury. Um, and then also gaining clarity of your identity outside of sport. We call this athletic identity. And so you can have exclusive athletic identity, which is basically like your sport is your life. It's pretty much it. Um, and then there's non-exclusive athletic identity, where yes, you are an athlete and that's incredibly important, but there's all these other things you do in your life that you recognize and also derive worth from. And among athletes who have never really had an injury, there's not a huge difference. But between athletes who, once athletes get injured, having a strong sense of non-exclusive athletic identity is probably one of the biggest things you can do to like um, cope with an injury and come back from it stronger mentally. Because you know if your whole identity is sport and that gets taken away from you, that's pretty hard to recover from. It's pretty hard to deal with when it's happening.
That is for sure.
Yeah.
I've experienced that. I remember my freshman year at Penn State. You're jumping up a level in terms of competition, and I was used to like my identity was playing sports and doing it exceptionally well, and not a ton of personal failure. And now I'm playing exclusively D-line against national caliber players for the first time, and it's like if I can't perform here, what the hell am I? And then you deal with injuries, and so that makes a ton of sense that we really need to establish an identity outside of our sport, and that's going to help us in a bunch of ways.
Yeah. And then it's also looking for new opportunities. Like you have to find, right? Like finding like what are you going to do with all this open time you have? Or like what are the goals of your rehab? Because you can't just say I'm just going to go back to who I was, because you're not going to be that person. You're going to be a little bit different mentally and physically. And so it's going to be like maybe it's how do I adjust my game? So for more people, it might be like, how do I play a less explosive style of ultimate or my sport? For other people, it might be just like, maybe I can use this opportunity to get better at other parts of my game while I'm not like actively playing. So with injury, it's a lot of like, coming to terms with like what happened and where you are, but then also like finding new ways to attack the future, with a growth mindset.
So that's a huge point of like, what are you going to do to fill the time, whether it's ultimate related or something else? Because for a lot of people, I mean, it is like all of their socialization, people playing league, pro, club, so maybe they're playing masters, they're doing leagues all year round, they get injured, and suddenly it's like 90% of their non-working time is not taken up anymore. So that's a really great point, because now suddenly you don't have some of the stuff that like really fills you up, but you also have way more time to sit and mull over your injury and how hard that is. So that can really snowball quickly.
Personally, I'm probably not the best example of this, because whenever I get injured, I just coach a club team. Doing that right now. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm.
It's a slightly different identity. It's like,
I think it's hard because like I've always been like, I should probably like have something outside of this, and I think I do to some sense. I'm a photographer. I'm not really following my advice a ton doing sports psychology as a career path, but I'm also doing mental health counseling. So like that's also a little, like there's some separation there. So I get like there's a good amount of my life that's like not all ultimate or not all sport related right now, at least. But
that's good. Yeah, I mean it's easy to, it's easy to fall into that pattern. But I do think, like you said, the having other avenues are really important, because even not looking at injury, like I'm curious here too if you have thoughts on, just people having a productive, and productive not necessarily meaning like skill building, but like satisfying off season. Because I think a lot of players have this sort of like, downtime after an off season, particularly if you've been at regionals or nationals and you really have this like high dopamine, like really high experience, and then nothing. And again, a lot of people play leagues and stuff, but it's not the same. So I'm curious your experience and your experience with athletes when they make that transition to like suddenly they do not have their competitive team.
Yeah, I think you see this a lot when college players graduate, and then like for the first time they get a full off season because it's not club ultimate in college, and so I
Yeah.
think it just, and this is why you see that there are a lot of like really really good college players who um, either just stop improving after college, or they just find that club is too much of a commitment, and it's because again like um, balancing your off season with being an adult like takes a lot of discipline and a lot of critical thinking. There's a lot of ultimate
Mm.
players who like I see them and I'm like, you play ultimate so much. You're in a league, you're in multiple leagues, you're at every single like off season tournament, you lift like every day. And it's like, what's stopping you from like playing at nationals versus like on some regionals level team? And I think a lot of it is um, one, like the discipline around like recovery and training, to not just like I want to play ultimate all the time. Like that's not a successful, like maybe when you're younger, but that's not a successful strategy when you're older and you have just a lot more things going on in your life, because you need to be able to balance reps with recovery and reflection. And then two is that reflection piece of like how do you improve year to year. That's like a really big consideration that most players, maybe in their mind, like, oh yeah, I kind of suck at handling, and then there might not be any discipline with trying to work on your disc skills. So there's a lot of reflection on like one, like identity wise, like what kind of career do I want to have? If you just want to play ultimate recreationally, like great, conversation over, cool. If you want to perform a little better, then there's some critical examination that goes into like what kind of career do I want to have? Do I want to play nationals? If I'm not doing that right now, then I have to look at that and be like, what is missing between what I'm currently doing and what someone who would have this career right now is doing, and how do I bridge that gap? I think like having that very clear vision of who you want to be, that goal, and then having the self-reflection and awareness to look at what's missing right now is super important, because a lot of people just stop at the goal. They're like, I want to be a national level player. And it's like, okay, like let's talk about your training. Let's talk about like your mindset. What do you actually see here? And for a lot of people, they just never thought of that before.
That's such a great point. Also, side note, I realized we actually are live streaming, which is cool, and so we have someone on the chat,
Oh,
EMF.
cool.
But yeah, that's. I mean, I remember, yeah, in the college, and you're playing all the time, and you don't have to think as much. You really don't, and you can just add whatever. And so with training, with practice, something I talk about a lot is minimal effective dose. What is the minimum you can do to start to make gains? Because yeah, like you're saying, we have to be much more mindful about where we are spending our time and energy, because we don't have as many resources to recover. We don't have as much time. We probably don't have as much mental energy if we have a job. And like personally, I've shared recently, I've made gains in the last few years throwing because I've been more intentional and specific about it, and focused, and crucially not in constant pain, which makes a big difference. But for years, because of being really busy and stressed with jobs, injuries, and also just like not having the awareness of like, hey, I need to very consciously work on this gap to make it better. I think, like you said, a lot of people, they play college, they play some club, and they play year round, and like that's enough to build them up to a certain point. So they don't have to consciously think about a lot of the skill building.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to address a question, the comment
Yeah.
in the live chat, which is like the fact that sometimes you're even busier when you're injured, which is 100% true. I think a lot of times sometimes we just like overlook the fact that, like doing your PT, and then once you start getting a little bit better, like doing your PT on top of lifting and on top of training, and then if you still want to be involved with the team, like going to practices, going to games, tournaments, like that can be really time consuming. And so I think there is a balance between like actually knowing what you want to prioritize. Like you look at this in professional sports all the time. Like when someone gets injured, they're not traveling with the team all the time. Um, they might come to a home game or two. They might travel for the playoffs, but they are focused on their rehab. And so a lot of times there needs to also just be a serious prioritization of like what is important for me to devote time to. It's like it's what you talk about in your training all the time. Like how do I devote enough time to maintain other things, but then really improve in one thing? And in this case of improving, it's your injury. And I think it goes back to the social support thing and the athletic identity piece of it might be really hard to keep maintaining all the commitments you have in your sport while being injured and like doing both of those at the same time. And for some people, it might require them to actually like seriously look at their life and be like, if I'm injured and I really want to rehab and train well, like, can I afford to attend everything my team I was injured on? Can I afford to go to everything there? Or maybe do I need to take a step back, focus on my rehab, and maybe like look for my support in like the other areas of my life through my family or through my non-ultimate friends or through just like ultimate friends who like I see outside of practice, where like my only form of socialization isn't practice and games.
Yeah, it's a great point about feeling busy when you're injured. Because yeah, and I think I like the perspective you bring up, like professional athletes, because on the one hand, professional athletes have way more resources than we do, and that is their job. So we can't just mimic everything that they do. However, when you look at what and how they prioritize, that can be very instructive, such as not necessarily traveling with teams, not going to all team events, because they are putting everything into that rehab basket. So I think that is a very helpful thing to remind ourselves of.
Yeah. And I think like, juggling with whether or not you feel like you're living up to your obligations as a teammate, I think it really goes back into something else we talked about, which is like your own needs are important too. And if you can't fulfill your own physical and emotional needs with a team, if you're expected to do rehab and show up to everything, I think it's worth asking yourself, like, is this like, am I giving too much to this team, and is this team taking too much from me? Because it should be reciprocal, where if you're giving a lot to a team by showing up, like you should feel rewarded for that effort. Or if it's simply a commitment you can't make, if your team is making you feel guilty for prioritizing yourself when you're injured, I would like just think about that.
I totally agree. I mean, I've felt this and I understand feeling like, oh, maybe you're not showing up for your team. But again, part of it comes down to expectations. If you communicate with your team and like, hey, here's what I can do, is that acceptable to remain a player on this team? Or can you help me with if I'm going to be doing this? Another thing to think about is that depending on the injury, it varies. But like when you are injured, everything takes more energy mentally and physically. It changes how you live. It changes, like, depending on the injury, again, showering. Like, literally everything can start taking more energy. You have pain that nags at you. I mean, I used to have pain that, like, was so constant that it just, my energy seeped out of me all day long, and I would not have as much. And I think it's important to acknowledge that for injured teammates and for yourself, that you just aren't going to have the same energy, even if you're doing the same amount of stuff that you would if you were not injured.
Yeah, I remember, honestly, that was the biggest thing I struggled with for like the 6 weeks post-surgery, which was like, wow, everything is just like so much more difficult to do mentally. Of like, I have to get up and like do, so like if I want to get a glass of water, like I gotta get up, like grab my crutches, go like somehow like hold the glass of water while like going back to my like table or couch or whatever. Or even just like when I'm coaching, it's like, oh, like I gotta get up from my seat and like go all the way to the sideline, and like I'm doing it for like 4 hours or like 6 or 8 at a tournament, and like that was a lot to ask, and like it was definitely. And I remember I talked to the team about expectations, where I was like, hey, like when I'm coaching, like do not expect me to have any coherent thoughts about how we're doing on the field, because like I'm going to be looking at our line calling sheet and I'm going to be sitting on the sideline. Like you just can't expect me to do that. They're like, cool. And so like negotiating those expectations and navigating like the team culture around it was like really helpful for that.
Yeah, and it sounds like you were probably a better communicator than most people in that scenario, to be honest. But yeah, EMF is sharing some more about the college culture, which I don't think is unique. But about, the culture was you have to show up to practice when sick and when injured, make sure you're still learning on the sideline and paying attention, supporting your teammates. And I can understand all that. I think when that becomes an extreme, that can be very detrimental to your mental and probably physical health too.
Yeah.
And like college
if you're
teams,
learning and you are feeling supported and you have the time to do that, by all means, do that. That's great. But like, there's a lot of people who like that's too much of an ask. And so in that case, like, is your college culture going to make you choose between that? So,
right. And also like if you can show up better for the team when you're healthy, if you're able to put more resources into that and come back sooner, both mentally and physically, then it might actually be hurting the team if you're overdoing it and overextending yourself. And another point too is, and Marshall, you've probably seen this more than I have, with more coaching. There's a wide variety of college team leadership, and it's not always good. So I think it's helpful to just sort of like explore, was this culture healthy? What can I take from it? What maybe is something I should not continue?
This is why it's super important to like really get to know just like other experiences. Like this is why diversity is so important, is that you're getting different perspectives. If you live your whole life just on a single culture, on a single team, you're not going to be able to tell when like a norm or an expectation is actually like unhealthy or not, or too demanding of you or not. And so that's like the really fun part of club, is that like all these teammates from all these different times and places, like we can talk to each other about like the teams we've been on and what's good and what's not, and like what we want to bring here and what we, like what we want to fade and what we don't want to fade. And like that's like a really cool part of club. With college, sometimes it's a little harder to do that because there are a bunch of players who probably don't play club, and leadership isn't always as experienced, so it can kind of just become very perpetuating in that sense, and it's hard to get an outside view.
Yeah, my freshman year of college was the year that the ban on the Penn State team was lifted, so they weren't able to play in the series or I think sanctioned tournaments for a few years. So the team was super gung-ho, and we did like a 3-hour practice basically 5 days a week, year-round. It may not have been every single week, but like I just thought that was normal, like 3 hours of practice a day every weekday. And I came to find out that like not so much, and it was not shocking that like a lot of people dealt with overuse injuries.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So another thought I had was when it comes to like mental performance and coaching that, helping people show up and make the most of their potential. Have you, because you've worked with other sports, have you noticed any difference between ultimate and other sports? Any themes? Maybe not, but I'm just curious.
I think at lower levels of ultimate, it's definitely there's just like less awareness around like other concepts, and like just awareness around like different, especially around high stakes, familiarity with high stakes stuff, just because in other sports there's just like more resources poured into that. So like there's more people, like games, there's like scholarships, college sports, that's on the line more. So there's just less awareness around that. But at higher levels, it's pretty, I would say honestly, it's fairly comparable to some of the teams I've worked with. For context, I did most of my grad training working with a couple D3 teams. So I worked with a D3 women's basketball team, a D3 baseball team. Also spent a couple of times working with some D3 women's gymnastics, football, wrestling. And in those cases, I found that at lower levels of sport, there's less highly motivated people, and so the work you do is more on a team level. So working with team leadership on like one, creating educational and activity opportunities for them to learn the concepts, um, helping the team leadership really create that common narrative, that common language and model, for like just like a common mental framework, like helping the leadership establish that on the team through their messaging and actions. Um, and then maybe once or twice you get a really motivated individual who wants to like get better mentally, and you work with them individually, and that's really fun. But it's more team level. I would say at very high levels, like let's say like the NBA or Olympics, it's there's some team collaboration, with like consulting the coaches and leadership and other stakeholders on the team, but it's also a lot of individual work, simply because at that level there's just time is such a precious resource that like it can be really difficult to find a common time for everyone on the team to get together outside of practice and games and team meetings. And so it's a lot of individual work. And the nice part is those athletes are really motivated, and they are really self-aware mostly, and they have really good understanding of themselves and are like have a growth mindset and are willing to learn. And so the individual work with them is really nice. So um, I don't know. I feel like the mental strategies and stuff are all pretty similar. Like everyone always says, like, "Oh, this sport is so mental." It's like they all are. They're
Yep.
just in different ways. Like with, it was really fun to jump right into baseball after a season of basketball, because basketball feels really fast paced. Um, running up and down the court, it's similar to ultimate, right? Defense and offense. It flips like can change on a coin flip, and you're asked to do both. Versus in baseball, like positions are specialized. There's like 20 seconds between things. You're just like out there. And so the struggles and how people describe those struggles can feel different. I had a pitcher tell me, like, I really struggle when I feel like I'm alone on the mound, where I don't trust my defense to like back me up if I make a mistake and allow a hit, for example. Versus in basketball, it's like, oh wow, I'm like I'm overthinking this shot, or like I just like can't get to my spot, like feeling pressure at the free throw. Like they might be described a little differently because of the pace of the sport or what they're asked to do, but uh, they're they're on, like, the principles that inform those issues are the same.
That makes sense. And it's similar with training, where you look at a sport specific thing, and it's like there are some things that are going to be different, but foundationally, training
Mm-hmm.
principles are the same.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that is really cool, that you've gotten to experience being around all different sports. A lot of people don't from that perspective. And yeah, on Ultimate, I've experienced a lot of players who have not had other sport experience, which even in other sports, football, basketball, etc. Like most of those players like have played other sports as well besides their own. And those are more conventional sports, so they grew up in competitive environments. They learned certain things that are common among the most popular sports.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting hearing from ultimate athletes who like have not played any other sports, because it's just, I think it's brings a different perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing people, like talking to people who have played Ultimate, who have also played other sports versus people who haven't, is just like, um, I think the biggest difference I've seen is, or the biggest reported difference I've seen is just like people talk about the ability to handle like trash talk, harsh criticism, or just like
Mm-hmm.
handle decisions, like leadership decisions, less personally. Um, because like in other sports, like, yeah, like you're not good, like you're on the bottom of the roster, like congrats, you're not playing today. Um, Versus like
Mm-hmm.
here, like if you don't get played on a team, like you're gonna be like, a lot of people are gonna be like, put me on a new team, like this sucks. And like fair enough, like you're paying to do this, like you should want to be able to play and stuff. Um, but for some people will struggle with that a lot more. Um, and sometimes it's like, oh, like I didn't get played this point, or like I get taken off, like what does that mean? Or whatever, is like struggling to buy into like the team picture of it because you're taking things personally. But I think that's just like personal experience talking to people and listening, I don't really have a ton to like personally say about that.
Yeah, I've noticed similar things, and I think people take it if you're just not used to it, you don't have as much experience
Yeah.
being in. It's not ruthless, but it's just like it's impersonal. It's
Mm-hmm.
these decisions have to be made. I think too, like some of the adversity on the field, like certainly trash talk, being able to handle things and not get totally bent out of shape. Obviously,
Yeah, and
physical
that also plays
contact.
into the spirit of the game stuff of just like the culture of Ultimate's really different. So like, of course, if you played your life playing basketball and football and soccer and all these other things, like yes, you're gonna go to Ultimate and like you're gonna be used to whatever's thrown at you.
Right, right. It is very different. Very cool. Um, I am you kind of touched on this already. Let me just see if there's anything I missed. But I also had thoughts about differences between like different levels or divisions of Ultimate that you've seen, both as a coach or a player. Um, you mentioned that a little bit, like in lower levels, it's different. But I was curious if you had any other thoughts on that.
In terms of mental strategy, I think it's pretty similar across most
Mm-hmm.
divisions. I think attitudes across teams are mostly the same. Um, I would say probably, okay, so I would say um, probably like 20-30% of people like don't think this work is helpful. Like they're
Hmm.
against it or they don't want to do it. I would say another like 40-50% are like this stuff is useful and like I would like to like read a book, listen to a podcast about it and like learn about it, but they won't actually devote time outside of like they won't devote time to do mental like um, I hesitate to say mental training, but like just like spending time working on their mental game. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's like that 10-5% who are like, I'm all on board. Like, let's spend a ton of time, like, whether that's just like untangling my relationship with the sport and my different identities and like how I like want things to progress and just like reflecting in general, or it's like actually like practicing like your mindfulness or your ability to visualize or like more concrete skills like that. Um, or even just like learning how to manage your self-talk, like those require time to like deliberately work on. There are a lot of people who who have played a long time and as they play they kind of just like gradually learn and pick that up, but there's a lot of people who don't do that or struggle doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if let's say someone's listening and they're like, "Hey, I want to get into this or learn a little bit more about it." What do you think? And I'll have you share your information more shortly. But what would you have them start with, or like, are there resources that you're like, "Hey, you should definitely check this out if you want to at least like get yourself moving in this direction of
Yeah,
working on mental
i'm
performance?"
I'm currently working on a video series for some of my clients of just like some basic foundational stuff to start on. Um, I think the important things to start on are um, understanding like your mental state. So like understanding what you're feeling in a game. So like your emotional awareness, your mental awareness, um, understanding your identity. So like like what I talk about, your relationship with the sport, your athletic identity, like your actual goals and like what the hell you want to accomplish in your career, and then also like looking at the other skills of like how is my self talk like. Am I able to like when I visualize stuff? Like, am I able to visualize success, or do I constantly get intrusive thoughts of like all the things I mess up in, or just like your ability to breathe and stay calm, um, like those other mental skills. So I would say in like those three kind of areas, you can just like think about that, like write down where you think you are, what you need to improve. I always love using rating scales of like if you're on a 0 to 10, where you put yourself right now, and then like what you think is possible for you. That's a really important question of like, what do you think your ceiling is? It's usually higher than you think. You just need to believe it. And then what can you do between now and tomorrow to make that, or now and next week, or now for a month to turn that. If you're a 5 in something, how do you turn that up to a 6? Or if you really like got worse at it, what would it take what would need to go wrong for you to go from a 5 to a 4? And just like, what makes the concrete difference in that? And then you go do it.
I like it. I like it. It helps people with taking action. So also, I'd love to have you chat about a little bit about exactly what you're doing at this point with the Spiral Mental Performance and how people can get in touch with you, maybe work with you.
Yeah, sure. So we offer individual sessions to athletes and also coaches, and then we offer team workshops. Those are the two primary services. We do bundle a lot of things. So for teams who we do workshops with, we usually offer like complimentary consulting. So like, we do the workshop, we collaborate on like what topics are needed for the team and like what the plan is. But then also if coaches and captains are like, okay, like how do we actually implement, like, we did this is great. How do we actually make sure the team like follows through with this? Or how do we incorporate this with our messaging or the common language or framework? Then we just like are willing to continue communicate, hop on a call occasionally to just like here's how you can, here's some ideas, try this out. So a lot of times we offer like, we'll bundle workshops with teams and then offer that kind of consulting on the side. And then on the individual side, we work with athletes individually. So, maybe it's just like your team isn't going to do it, but you have the drive to get better, or you're in a rut and you really like are seeking support and you're at your rope's end. We offer, we just see people individually. We offer some packages where you can just like schedule single sessions with us, or you can just like pay us every month, and then you can kind of just like schedule whenever you want, as many times as you want in a month, which is like pretty nice flexibility wise. Yeah. And then when we do workshops with teams, we usually offer like a team discount. So individuals on that team can see us for a little bit cheaper, which is nice. But in both cases, we offer like free consultation discovery calls. So if you're interested and you want to learn more, like there's a link in like our business profile bio where you can just schedule an appointment and then just chat it out for like sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes it's 30 minutes, sometimes it's 45 or longer. Pretty much however much time it takes for like me to understand like what kind of issues or like where you're coming from and like the context behind those issues. And then also just like working on understanding between like where our services can actually like come in to help and what you can afford basically. So
That sounds great. And so you're on your Spiral Mental Performance on Instagram, and is that also your website?
Yep, it is.
Awesome. And I'll put it in the description for the show as well.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And then we help teams with like a ton of different, things. Mental performance, sports psychology. It covers such a wide range of topics, which is nice. It's can be like helping consult a team on like how to change their culture or behavior towards certain things, to helping like individuals, like how do I get in a flow state more consistently? Or for other people, it's like a big issue is performance anxiety, negative self-talk, confidence. That's probably like 80% of the people who come in. And then there are other people who are like, oh, like I want to visualize better, or like I want to work on this. And it's like really specific. But a lot of people come in with like, I want to be more confident with what I do.
That makes sense.
Of low confidence.
Got it. Yeah. Well, it's amazing work, and it's so needed in Ultimate. So yeah, I appreciate you being on here and sharing all your expertise.
Yeah, of course.
It's super cool.
It was fun talking.
It's always a great time.
Yeah, no, I guess people don't know, but Brian and I, we've like attempted to record stuff on so many occasions, and then we like published like 2% of it. So I'm excited that this will actually like be published in full for once.
I know, finally, from taking videos and like questionable audio and other stuff. So this will be great. Well, I'll probably have Marshall on again. He's also in my Ultimate Mobility membership, so if people are in there, you can reach out to him there if for some reason you can't find his stuff elsewhere. But yeah, this has been a blast.
Cool.